Get your fabric scraps ready because I'm going to show you how to make these really adorable quilt block Christmas ornaments. Now I've come up with 16 different designs, but the ideas are limitless. You're just going to make up these little blocks and then you're going to mix and match and make a really beautiful selection of Christmas ornaments. My name's Stacey and I teach sewing and quilting tutorials. Please do hit that like and subscribe button so you can see more of my content. But now let's get on with making these really gorgeous ornaments. We're going to start off by making teeny tiny little half square triangles, and then I'll show you how to make up these gorgeous little blocks. So we need 2 squares and they measure 2 inches by 2 inches. Then on the wrong side of one of them, we're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, starting in the top corner, coming down to the bottom corner. Then we're going to place them right sides together. So if this fabricated right side, we'd be placing them together. We want to line up all the edges. If you'd like to, you can pop some pins in just to hold it in place. It is really little, so I'm not going to worry about it. Now what we're going to do is sew along each side of the line. I'm using wonderful confetti thread. I'm stitching at stitch length 2. I've got my 1/4 inch foot on and I'm lining up the edge of the foot along that line there. I'm going to start at the very edge of my square and then sew until I get to the very end. Now if you were batch sewing these, you could just sew another one right now, but I don't have another piece to sew, so I'll just cut my thread, lift it up and turn it around and sew along the other side. Cutting my thread, and now let's cut. So I'm going to take my ruler, line it up along the line we drew, take my rotary cutter and cut along that line. Now we've got 2 pieces, we're going to press. So just out of habit I will set those stitches, which just sets them into the fabric, making them stronger and helps our block lay flatter. This is a craft project so it doesn't really matter too much. Then I'm going to open it up and press the seams towards my dark fabric. A little bit fiddly because these pieces are so little. We've never made anything this little before with quilting. Okay, now we're going to square them up. So our half square triangles need to measure 1.5 inches squared. So I'm just going to take my ruler, find that diagonal line, pop it on the seam. Then I'm going to find my 1.5 inch mark on my ruler. Once I can see it's fitting in, I'm just going to trim, and I'll do exactly the same on all 4 sides. So once we've done one, that's looking really great, then I'll just carry on and square up however many half square triangles I have to square up. What I suggest you do is make up a whole lot of half square triangles and then cut a whole lot of 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch squares like I have here, and then we're just going to have a play. Now this tutorial is a little bit different to my regular tutorials. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do because the idea is that with all these pieces we can make all these different little quilt block ornaments, and I'll put the image up now. And you can find this over on my website. I'll put a link down in the description below if you'd like to take a closer look. So now I just want you to have a play with your pieces and make up your little quilt blocks as you wish. So I'm going to make my first little quilt block Christmas ornament, and we want to go 3 across and 3 down, and I'm going to make a little friendship block. You can make whatever block you like, just like I said. So it doesn't have to be this one. Remember, we can make up all sorts of quilt blocks with our pieces. This is a really fun little project. I think it would be neat to make a whole set of little ornaments with all the different ways you can make the little blocks up. And I've cut these pieces, I've fussy cut them, so you can see the little cars in the center there. There's one with a truck, isn't that cute? This is all art gallery fabric that I'm working with. Okay, can you see how I've got my little star there? So all I'm going to do now is sew each of the rows together, and then I'm going to press and then sew those rows together. So to sew the pieces together, we just place them right sides together, line up all those edges. They're a little bit little, so I'm not going to worry about a pin, and I am sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once I've sewn my 3 rows together, I will just give those a quick press before I then sew the rows together. So we can get the block sitting really nicely and nest those seams, I am going to press the seams so we can nest them. So for the top and the bottom row, I'm going to press both of the seams out towards the outer edge, and for the middle row, I'll press the seams in. And we don't have to worry too much about setting stitches and things. This is really just more of a craft project. So those ones are both coming out. It is a little bit fiddly because it's so little but so cute. In the bottom row, those seams are going out again. Now I'm just going to sew those rows together. So taking the first and the second row, placing them right sides together, we are going to nest the seams, but I'm not going to pin them. I'm just going to feel where they kind of sit in next to each other, because remember, we've got one seam pressed and going this way, another pressed and going this way, so they kind of just click into place, especially because the pieces are so small. I'll line up these edges and then sew along the edge. Of course, use pins if you'd prefer. And then I'll just do the same for the last row. Now let's give our tiny little block a press. So just flipping it over to the back, and I've found for me the easiest thing to do is just to open up these seams and press them. But press the seams however you prefer. It is a little bit fiddly. Okay, I'm just going to give it a once over and just get all those seams sitting nicely. And then we'll just flip it over to the front. Isn't that a little cutie pie? So I'll just give that a once over on the front. So now we need to take a piece of iron-on fusible fleece, and it measures 3 inches by 3 inches. It's just 1/2 inch smaller than our little quilt block. I'm going to flip it over to the back, and on the wrong side of our quilt block, I'm going to take the bumpy side, which is the glue, and place that down onto our quilt block and press that. And we want it in the center so we can see about 1/4 inch around the whole quilt block. And then we'll press. Oh, it does help to turn your iron on. Okay, and then I'm just going to flip it over to the front and give it a press on the front as well. And then let's move on to the next step. So now I've got my back of my ornament, and that measures 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches squared. I'm going to take a piece of ribbon. I'm using this really nice pink velvety ribbon, and I want to cut about 6 inches. So I'm just going to line it up on my mat and measure 6 inches and cut. So then what we're going to do is fold it in half, but I like to fold it in half so that the velvet is on top of the velvet, so that when we hang it on the tree, it's going to sit perfectly. I find that if you create your loop like this, I find the ornament twists and it never sits right. So I just like to twist this bottom piece so it's facing upright too. So we've got both the velvet pieces facing me, or both of your right side of your ribbon. And then what we're going to do is take our ornament, find the top center, and I'm going to place the edge of the ribbon lined up with the edge of our ornament like that. And then what you can do if you want to check that that's right is you can just grab it there with your finger and lift it up, and you can see that when I sew that, that's going to be correct. So once I've got that sitting really nicely, and if anything, I prefer the ribbon hanging a little bit off the edge there than being a little bit too shy. Once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to take a pin, and from the back, I'm just going to pin it in place. like that. And that's because we're about to enclose it in and we'll be working from the back here. That's why I pinned it from the back, but I wanted to show you that that's sitting really nicely there. Then we're going to take the back of our Christmas ornament and place that on top. So we've got right sides facing each other. Now, if you made your loop longer, just be careful that you're not going to sew it into the ornament. If it's longer, maybe just fold it up and tuck it in there. So now we're placing our back on top and we're lining up all the edges, and when we're happy, we will pop a few pins in. I'm going to pin it on this side because this is the side I want to sew on. So I like to pin on the corners. And you can see I've got all my edges lined up really nicely there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find the top. And there's my top because I've got my ribbon there. Well, we want to start on the bottom, and what we want to do is we want to start in the middle of our left hand square and stop in the middle of our right hand square here. Now, if you won't remember to do that, you could just mark it. So we'll start here, go all the way around and stop here, and we will do a back stitch because I find when we're turning it right sides out, it does tend to pull at those stitches. Starting on that first mark, I'm still stitching with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, removing the pins as I need to, going forward a few stitches and then back a few stitches. Then I'm going to turn on my corners, making sure my needle's down, doing my best guess of a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then carrying her along until I get all the way back to that second mark. Now when I come up to my little hoop, I'm going to do a back stitch. I've stitched right over the top and I can feel that on my sewing machine because it feels much thicker sewing through that velvet ribbon. I will do a back stitch all the way back over it and then I'll carry on. I'm back up to that mark that we made, so I'm going to sew right up to that, do a back stitch, and then cut my thread. So we're going to trim the corners to remove the bulk, and we're just being extra careful we don't get too close to those stitches on all 4 corners. Then what we're going to do is find our opening. And what's handy is we've got that ribbon we can hold on to. We're going to grab that ribbon and pull it right sides out and get it sitting nicely. Now at this point I like to use a point turner just to get those corners sitting really nicely, and if you don't have a point turner, use something similar like maybe a chopstick. Just be gentle but firm. We don't want to accidentally poke all the way through our fabric and cause a problem. Okay, so once we're happy with how it's all sitting, let's give that a quick press. So I'm going to find my opening and I want to fold it in about 1/4 inch because that was our seam allowance, and we want it to be sitting really nicely so that when we sew our top stitch around the edge there, you can't see that the opening was ever there. So just get that sitting really nicely, and then when you're happy, give it a press. That looks pretty good to me. And then what we can do is just roll out these edges as well, so they're sitting really nicely on all 4 edges. Okay, I'm just going to come back and give that one more press. Okay, now we're just going to do our top stitch. I've just popped a pin in there to hold that opening closed so I know when I sew around that edge it's going to sit really nicely. Now I've got my left compensating foot on here, which just means I can butt the edge up really nicely up against that foot there, and I get a really nice 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now I know what it's called for a Juki. I know other sewing machines do have them. I'm just not sure of the name. So just Google Juki equivalent for whatever your sewing machine is if you want to look it up to see if there's one for your sewing machine. Now we're just going to start just before that opening and go around the entire edge. Now sometimes I find that when you're turning, if we're stitching, I'm stitching at stitch length 2, I haven't changed that. I probably should have changed it to 2.5, but it doesn't matter, it's still a personal preference. But the stitch length is too long for what I need right now, so I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller and just get a slightly smaller stitch in there. And now it's perfect to turn, so I'm going to put it back up to 2 and then carry on. Coming right up to where I started, I'm just going to lift my foot up and move this piece of thread across, because if we stitch over it, it could become a bird's nest, and I'm going to hold it. I'm coming right past where we started, and then I will do a couple of back stitches. Cutting my thread, and then I will trim any loose thread. And now I will just trim that thread as close as I can. Isn't that cute? Now, isn't this just the most gorgeous little Christmas ornament you've ever seen? Okay, I might be exaggerating, but I think they're pretty cute. And don't you just love the idea that all you need is 2 blocks, you're going to mix and match them, and you're making a whole variety of little quilt blocks. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I did making it for you. I really appreciate you watching it till the very end. And if you're looking for gift ideas to sew, I'm going to put a link up above with my #1 playlist of gifts to sew. Happy sewing, my friends!